I was completely erased from my own family's legacy the moment my daughter-in-law laughed and told me the grand opening was invitation only. But just 3 days later, the same people who shut me out showed up at my front door demanding $120,000 like I owed it to them. They expected a wire transfer. Instead, I sent a cardboard box filled with memories, betrayal, and 6 words that shattered their perfect little world forever. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed hard work and loyalty could hold a family together. Now, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen of my bakery long after closing time, I am no longer certain of that. Whitmore Bakery and Cafe has stood on the same brick corner in Charleston, South Carolina for more than 40 years. My late husband, Thomas, and I opened it when we were young enough to think love and determination were all two people needed to survive. Back then, we could barely afford flour some weeks. We worked through humid summers without proper air conditioning and winters when the ovens were the only source of heat in the building. But somehow we made it work. Even now, every morning before sunrise, I still unlock the bakery doors myself. The scent of cinnamon, butter, sugar, and fresh bread settles into the walls before dawn fully arrives. Those smells raised my son as much as I did. Sometimes I think Daniel learned to walk on these old black and white tiled floors before he ever learned to run outside. Most mornings, I move slowly through the bakery with a cup of coffee warming my hands, while the younger employees prepare pastry trays for the display cases. The newer customers often stand near the windows, taking photographs of cupcakes and iced pastries for social media. They rarely know the woman wiping down the tables once built the entire place from nothing beside her husband. After Thomas died from cancer 12 years ago, the bakery became my entire world. I buried my grief underneath long work days and unpaid invoices. I handled vendors during the day and cried quietly at night after Daniel went to sleep. There was never room for weakness because there was always another bill waiting on the kitchen counter. Daniel was a good boy once, gentle, funny, hardworking. When he was little, he used to stand beside me on a wooden stool dusted with flour from head to toe. He loved shaping pie crusts with his tiny hands, even though he ruined more dough than he fixed. I can still hear his laughter echoing through the kitchen when Thomas tossed bits of flour at him during the morning rush. Somewhere along the way, life changed him. Or maybe life revealed parts of him I never wanted to see. After Daniel married Vanessa Whitmore 3 years ago, the distance between us grew slowly enough that I almost convinced myself it was normal. Fewer Sunday dinners, shorter phone calls, excuses during holidays. Vanessa always seemed polished and charming in public, but underneath that polished smile lived a constant hunger for status and appearance. She wanted Whitmore Bakery to become something modern and luxurious, something worthy of Charleston socialites and wealthy tourists. She replaced warm family decorations with sleek furniture and pale gold accents that looked beautiful but strangely cold. She once described our original bakery style as a little outdated for the new brand image. I smiled politely when she said it, though the words stayed with me for weeks. I tried very hard to love her like a daughter. I shared family recipes, introduced her to suppliers, and even trusted her with business ideas I once protected carefully. But every kindness seemed to create more distance instead of less. That evening, after the employees left, I stood alone near the back kitchen, holding an old framed photograph of Thomas, Daniel, and me during our first year in business. We looked exhausted in the picture, but we also looked happy. For the first time in many years, I quietly wondered whether the very success we fought so hard to build was now destroying the family we built it for. If you are still watching and already feeling the tension building inside this family, comment number 1 below so I know you are here with me. Because what happened after that phone call changed everything forever. The closer the grand opening came, the more Charleston seemed obsessed with Vanessa Whitmore's new vision for our family bakery. Everywhere I looked, there were glossy photographs online showing marble countertops, gold lighting fixtures, imported wine displays, and elegant pastry towers arranged like jewelry. Influencers posted short videos praising the reinvention of Whitmore Bakery as if the business had appeared out of thin air a few months earlier. What hurt most was not what they included. It was what they left out. Not once did I see my name mentioned in the advertisements. Not once did I see a photograph of the original bakery Thomas and I built together. Every magazine article praised Vanessa's creativity and Daniel's entrepreneurship as though they alone had created the Whitmore name. Still, a quiet part of me kept waiting for Daniel to call personally and invite me. Each day that passed without hearing from him settled heavily inside my chest. I hated how often I checked my phone. At 67 years old, I felt ridiculous waiting for my own son to remember me. A few days before the opening, I finally opened my bedroom closet and began sorting through dresses I had not worn in years. I found the navy blue dress Thomas once said made me look elegant, even when I was exhausted from working double shifts at the bakery. Holding it against myself in the mirror brought back memories of earlier anniversaries when our little family celebrated milestones together with cheap champagne and exhausted smiles. Back then, success meant surviving another year. Now, success looked expensive, cold, and carefully photographed. I still convinced myself Daniel would want me there. Maybe he had simply been busy preparing for the opening. Maybe Vanessa had forgotten to send formal invitations. I searched for excuses because mothers become experts at protecting their children from blame. Finally, the night before the event, I called Daniel myself. He answered quickly, distracted and breathless. I could hear dishes clattering and voices moving loudly in the background. The restaurant was clearly full of last-minute preparations. I asked gently what time I should arrive for the grand opening. There was a brief silence. Then I heard Vanessa's voice in the background before she suddenly came onto the line herself. She gave a soft little laugh that still echoes painfully in my memory. Sorry, invitation only. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her, but Vanessa continued explaining that they were creating an exclusive atmosphere for investors, media personalities, and Charleston social circles. She mentioned that they wanted the event to feel modern and elevated for a younger luxury audience. Daniel said nothing, not one word. That silence cut deeper than anything Vanessa could have said. I stood in my kitchen gripping the edge of the counter while rain tapped softly against the windows behind me. I managed to keep my voice calm before ending the call politely. But the moment the line disconnected, the quiet inside the house felt unbearable. I sat alone at the old wooden table where I had once sorted bills late at night after Thomas died. Memories came rushing back harder than I expected. I remember skipping meals to afford Daniel's college tuition. I remembered working through fevers because missing shifts meant missing rent payments. I remembered selling my mother's jewelry during one terrible winter just to keep the bakery alive. For years, sacrifice made me necessary. Now I felt inconvenient. I looked toward the framed family photographs covering the bakery office wall and slowly realized something painful but undeniable. People who erase your worth often still expect unlimited access to your generosity. If this story is pulling you in and you can already sense something bigger coming, comment number 2 below. to let me know you are still watching. The next chapter reveals the moment money entered the picture and the betrayal became impossible to ignore. The days following that phone call felt strangely quiet, though Charleston itself seemed louder than ever. Everywhere I went, people talked about the new Whitmore Bakery location downtown. Customers came into the original cafe, excited about the grand opening, asking whether I was proud of Daniel and Vanessa for modernizing the family business. I smiled politely every time. After decades of owning a bakery, I had learned how to smile while swallowing exhaustion, grief, and disappointment all at once. Still, Vanessa's words lingered inside my mind long after the call ended. Some nights I barely slept. I would wake before dawn and stare at the ceiling, replaying her laugh over and over again. During work, I caught myself forgetting simple things I had done automatically for years. One morning, I nearly burned an entire tray of pecan pastries because my attention drifted while the ovens were running. What hurt most was not simply being excluded from the opening. It was realizing how easily I had been erased. Local magazines continued publishing glossy articles praising Vanessa as the creative force transforming Whitmore Bakery into a luxury destination. One article described her as the visionary behind Charleston's newest culinary experience. I stared at those words for a long time while sitting alone in my office behind the bakery kitchen. Visionary. As though Thomas and I had not spent 40 years building the foundation she now stood on. For the first time, however, something inside me began shifting. The sadness remained, but the self-blame slowly started disappearing. Instead of making excuses for Daniel and Vanessa, I began quietly observing them more clearly than I ever had before. 3 days after the grand opening announcement flooded social media, Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice sounded tense and distracted. He asked whether he and Vanessa could stop by the house that evening because they needed to discuss something important. The moment I heard those words, I already knew the conversation would involve money. They arrived just after sunset. Vanessa walked into my living room, wearing expensive cream-colored heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood floors. She looked exhausted beneath her polished appearance. Daniel followed behind her quietly, avoiding eye contact, as though he already carried shame he did not want to acknowledge. The tension filled the room before anyone even sat down. Vanessa explained that the new location was facing serious financial pressure. Construction costs had gone far beyond estimates. Investors were demanding additional guarantees. Vendor payments were overdue. The luxury renovations had become far more expensive than expected. Then she finally arrived at the real reason for the visit. They needed $120,000. She spoke carefully, framing it as temporary family support that would protect the Whitmore legacy for future generations. Daniel nodded quietly beside her, though he still would not fully meet my eyes. What struck me most was not the amount itself. It was the assumption underneath it. Neither of them apologized for excluding me from the opening. Neither acknowledged how deeply they had hurt me. Somehow, I was unwelcome at their celebration, but fully expected to rescue their financial problems. I sat silently studying my son while Vanessa continued talking about opportunity, expansion, and branding. Daniel looked tired, smaller somehow, as though he had surrendered pieces of himself little by little over the past few years. My retirement savings represented decades of sacrifice. They represented grief after Thomas died. They represented birthdays missed, vacations never taken, and years of waking before sunrise while my body ached from exhaustion. Yet sitting there in my living room, I realized Vanessa viewed that money as accessible capital rather than part of my life. Finally, the room fell quiet. I smiled softly and gave them the answer they expected. All right. The relief on Daniel's face appeared instantly. Vanessa relaxed back into her chair as though the crisis had already disappeared. Within minutes, They were discussing timelines and transfers with renewed confidence. After they left, I remained alone in the silence of my house for a very long time. Then I walked slowly upstairs and opened an old storage box filled with family photographs, handwritten recipes, and documents from the earliest years of Whitmore Bakery. And that was the moment my real decision began. The morning after Daniel and Vanessa asked for the money, I sat alone at my dining room table with the old storage box open in front of me. Sunlight spilled softly across faded photographs and brittle newspaper clippings that carried the scent of old paper and flour dust from another lifetime. I spent hours sorting through memories. There were photographs of Daniel as a little boy, standing behind the bakery counter with chocolate frosting smeared across his cheeks. Pictures of Thomas holding fresh pies while grinning proudly beside our first display window. Handwritten recipes covered with butter stains and hurried notes from years when we barely had time to sleep, let alone organize paperwork properly. At the bottom of the box rested unpaid bills from difficult winters long ago. I kept them all these years as reminders of what survival had cost us. Everything inside that box represented sacrifice, not branding, not luxury, not social status. Sacrifice. That realization settled into me with surprising calmness. For weeks, I had been drowning in hurt and confusion, but now something steadier replaced those emotions. I understood clearly that Daniel and Vanessa no longer viewed Whitmore Bakery as family history. To them, it had become a polished asset designed to impress wealthy strangers. And somehow, I had become inconvenient to that image. I decided then that I would not simply refuse the money. A simple refusal would teach them nothing. They needed to confront what they had allowed themselves to become. Carefully, I began selecting items for another box. I chose photographs of Daniel helping me knead dough when he was 7 years old. I included the original newspaper clipping announcing the opening of Whitmore Bakery and Cafe back in 1983, beside a smiling photograph of Thomas and me. I added copies of business suggestions I had offered Vanessa over the past year, each one dismissed or ignored completely. Then I printed several online articles praising Vanessa as the founder and creative visionary behind the Whitmore brand. Reading those words no longer made me cry. Instead, they clarified everything. Throughout the afternoon, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Vanessa asking when the transfer would arrive. Her texts remained polite on the surface, but impatience leaked through every sentence. Investors needed reassurance. Vendors were waiting. Timing was critical. I responded briefly without committing to anything specific. Outside, Charleston buzzed with excitement for the grand opening. Social media flooded with glamorous preview videos showing crystal chandeliers, imported marble tables, and employees arranging pastries like museum displays. Vanessa smiled brightly in every photograph, as though she had personally built the bakery from the ground up. By evening, I finally placed a clean white sheet of paper on my kitchen table. For a long time, I stared at the blank page. Then I wrote 6 words, slowly and carefully in dark black ink. You erased me. Now watch closely. Those words were not written from rage. They came from clarity. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace and sacrifice for love. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that respect also matters inside a family. Downtown Charleston glittered with cameras, luxury cars, and elegantly dressed guests, while I remained alone at home wearing an old gray sweater. Around 7 o'clock, I called a delivery service and instructed the driver to bring the sealed box directly to Vanessa at the restaurant entrance. Afterward, I sat quietly in my living room, listening to the distant rain against the windows. About 30 minutes later, my phone exploded with notifications. Several guests had already posted videos from the event online. In the background of one recording, I spotted the delivery box sitting near the front entrance while Vanessa frowned in confusion. Then another video appeared. This time, the box was open. Vanessa looked pale and furious. Daniel stood frozen beside her, holding one of the childhood photographs and shaking hands. Seconds later, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed across the screen while I stared silently at the old family portrait resting beside me on the couch. I answered Daniel's call on the third ring. The noise behind his voice sounded chaotic and sharp. I could hear music still playing somewhere in the background, along with the dishes clattering, muffled conversations, and Vanessa speaking loudly to someone nearby. What should have been the most glamorous night of their lives had clearly begun unraveling in front of everyone. "Mom, what is this?" Daniel asked breathlessly. His voice cracked in a way I had not heard since he was much younger. I remained calm, almost strangely calm even to myself. After weeks of swallowing humiliation and disappointment, something inside me had settled into clarity. In the background, I heard Vanessa demanding to know whether reporters had recorded the scene near the entrance. Her panic sounded focused less on pain and more on public embarrassment. Daniel kept asking why I sent the box. I told him quietly that the box contained the truth they had spent months trying to hide. The childhood photographs were there to remind him where Whitmore Bakery truly began. The newspaper clipping existed because history mattered, even when people tried rewriting it. The handwritten business notes symbolized every time I offered help, only to be dismissed like an outdated inconvenience. For several seconds, Daniel said nothing. That silence felt very different from the silence during our earlier phone call. Back then, his silence protected Vanessa. Now it sounded uncertain and ashamed. Then Vanessa's voice suddenly appeared much closer to the phone. She accused me of deliberately humiliating them during the most important night of their careers. According to her, I had manipulated emotions and damaged the image they worked so hard to create. What struck me most was how little she understood. Even now, standing in the middle of a collapsing celebration, Vanessa remained focused on appearance rather than the pain underneath everything. I calmly mentioned that I had reviewed the promotional materials for the opening. Every article and advertisement presented Vanessa as the visionary behind Whitmore Bakery. My name had disappeared completely from the company history. Daniel tried weakly explaining that the marketing team handled those decisions and no harm was intended. Listening to him, I realized how much of his adult life had been spent avoiding conflict instead of protecting the people he loved. I told him something I should have said long ago. Respect should not disappear simply because money becomes involved. The line went quiet again. Then Vanessa shifted the conversation back toward finances, almost immediately. Her voice tightened as she asked whether the $120,000 transfer was still coming through, because investors expected confirmation before the weekend. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Even after everything that happened, their true concern remained exactly the same. Money. That realization hurt more deeply than I expected. I finally told them the truth. The money was already gone. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. I could almost hear confusion spreading through the silence before shock finally arrived. I explained that I had donated the full amount to the Charleston Culinary and Trade Institute Scholarship Fund. The money would support working-class students studying baking, restaurant management, and skilled trades, young people trying to build honest futures with their own hands. At least they would value the opportunity. Vanessa exploded immediately after hearing that. Her anger poured through the phone so loudly, I had to pull it away from my ear for a moment. She accused me of betrayal and selfishness. Daniel sounded completely stunned beneath her shouting. I simply answered quietly, "You made your choices." Those words landed harder than I intended. Daniel finally understood the consequences were real now. There would be no rescue waiting underneath the collapse. Vanessa threatened to cut me out of their lives permanently, but I could not stop myself from thinking they had already done that emotionally a long time ago. The call ended with anger, tears, and an abrupt disconnect. Afterward, the silence inside my kitchen felt enormous. I sat alone in the darkness holding an old photograph of Daniel covered in flour beside Thomas's at the bakery counter. His smile in that picture was joyful and innocent. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood that the hardest part of motherhood is realizing love alone cannot fix someone's character. The days after the grand opening disaster passed slowly and uncomfortably. Charleston loved gossip almost as much as it loved expensive restaurants, and whispers about Whitmore Bakery spread quickly through downtown cafes, church groups, and local business circles. I noticed people watching me differently whenever I walked into town. Some looked sympathetic, others looked curious. Inside the original bakery, my employees sensed something was wrong, but none of them asked questions. They had known me too long to invade my privacy. Instead, they offered quiet kindness through small gestures. One morning, my assistant manager left fresh coffee beside my office door without saying a word. Another employee stayed late to help clean even though it was not her shift. Their respect comforted me more than they probably realized. Still, at night, doubt crept in. There were moments when I sat alone in my living room wondering whether I had gone too far. I replayed Daniel's voice in my mind after learning the money was gone. No matter how deeply he disappointed me, he was still my son. Part of motherhood is carrying guilt even when you know you were right. At the same time, another feeling quietly grew beside the sadness: relief. For the first time in years, I had defended myself instead of swallowing pain to keep peace inside the family. Meanwhile, Vanessa began posting carefully worded messages online about toxic relatives and older generations sabotaging younger success. She never mentioned me directly, but the meaning was obvious. Friends occasionally called asking whether I had seen the posts. I always answered the same way: no, and I do not plan to. Surprisingly, I meant it. Something inside me no longer felt desperate to explain myself to strangers. 4 nights later, Daniel called again. This time he was alone. The difference in his voice startled me immediately. The anger was gone completely. He sounded exhausted in a way that reached deeper than physical fatigue. I could hear quiet breathing on the other end before he finally spoke. The opening night embarrassment had rattled investors badly. Financial pressure inside the new restaurant was worsening by the day. Vendors wanted payment. Vanessa was furious constantly. They barely slept without arguing. Then Daniel admitted something that hurt more than I expected. Vanessa had intentionally pushed me out because she believed an older family image looked too small town and traditional for the luxury brand she wanted to create. She thought wealthy Charleston social circles preferred polished modern stories instead of family sacrifice and old bakery kitchens. And Daniel let it happen, not because he agreed entirely, but because he feared conflict and wanted Vanessa's approval more than he wanted to protect me. Hearing those words spoken aloud felt strangely different from suspecting them privately. I closed my eyes while he apologized for the first time without excuses attached to the apology. I listened quietly. As he spoke, I remembered the little boy who used to fall asleep in the bakery booths while I finished late-night inventory counts. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, fear had slowly replaced his integrity. Daniel finally asked whether our relationship could still be repaired. That question sat heavily inside me. Part of me wanted distance. Another part still loved him too deeply to walk away completely. I told him the money would not return. I would not rescue him financially from consequences he helped create. But if he truly wanted to rebuild his life honestly, I could offer something more valuable than cash: experience, guidance, truth. I told him I would help teach him how to rebuild the business properly, without shortcuts, entitlement, or carefully manufactured images, but he would have to do the hard work himself. Daniel became quiet again after hearing that. For the first time in weeks, I felt something lighter settle inside my chest. Boundaries were not cruelty. Sometimes real love required consequences before growth could begin. After the call ended, I sat alone in my kitchen watching the first pale light of dawn slowly appear outside the windows. If you are still watching and feeling the emotional weight of these choices, comment number 6 below so I know you are ready for Chapter 7. Because rebuilding trust turned out to be even harder than losing it. Over the next several weeks, Daniel started visiting the original bakery more often, always alone. At first, the visits felt awkward and uncertain, like two people trying to rebuild a bridge while standing on opposite sides of a river. He usually arrived early in the morning before customers filled the cafe, wearing wrinkled shirts and dark circles beneath his eyes that no amount of expensive grooming could hide anymore. The polished confidence he once carried around Vanessa had disappeared. In its place was exhaustion. Meanwhile, the new downtown location continued struggling despite all the glamorous marketing surrounding it. Charleston's social circles lost interest quickly once the excitement faded. Investors grew nervous about falling profits, and online reviews became increasingly harsh. Many customers complained that the bakery looked beautiful but lacked warmth and authenticity. Style over substance. That phrase appeared repeatedly in reviews. Some longtime employees from the downtown location quietly quit after only a few months. Vendor payments were delayed again, and rumors about financial instability spread through the restaurant community faster than Vanessa could contain them online. I never said, "I warned you." There was no satisfaction in watching my son's life unravel. During his visits, Daniel slowly began talking more openly about the pressure he had been living under. Vanessa remained obsessed with appearances even while the business weakened financially. Every conversation revolved around image, status, social connections, and keeping investors impressed. Daniel admitted he felt trapped between trying to save his marriage and trying to save the business. Listening to him, I realized something difficult. Pain and pressure do not excuse betrayal, but they can slowly weaken people who are desperate for approval. One rainy Tuesday morning, Daniel arrived before sunrise and quietly asked whether he could help in the kitchen. I handed him an apron without making a big moment out of it. For the next 2 hours, we worked side by side preparing dough, the same way we had years earlier when he was a teenager learning the business from Thomas and me. Flour covered his hands, while the scent of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. Watching him there stirred memories so vivid they almost hurt. That morning, Daniel also learned the truth about the financial audit. The downtown operation had been spending enormous amounts of company money on luxury influencer events, designer decorations, custom photography campaigns, and image consultants. Even Daniel looked shocked, seeing how quickly the expenses had spiraled out of control. Vanessa blamed investors, economic conditions, and stress. She blamed everyone except herself. The tension inside their marriage became impossible to hide. Daniel admitted they barely spoke calmly anymore. Some nights they slept in separate rooms after arguments lasting hours. Part of me felt deeply sad watching my son's marriage collapse so painfully. Another part quietly recognized that my instincts about Vanessa had never been wrong. As the morning continued, I explained something simple Daniel had forgotten during all the chaos. Strong businesses are built through consistency and trust, not expensive appearances. Loyal customers return because they feel cared for, not because an influencer posted a photograph online. Daniel stayed silent for a long moment while shaping dough beside me. Finally, he admitted he barely recognized himself anymore. For the first time since everything began, I noticed genuine accountability replacing defensiveness in his voice. He was no longer searching for excuses. Before leaving, Daniel stood near the sink, brushing flour from his hands. For one brief second, he looked exactly like the little boy who used to laugh inside this kitchen decades earlier, and I realized trust does not rebuild through apologies alone. It rebuilds quietly through consistent actions. By early autumn, Daniel had become part of the bakery again in ways I never expected after everything that happened. Every morning before driving downtown, he arrived before sunrise to help prepare dough, stock shelves, and greet longtime customers who still remembered him as the boy running through the kitchen with flour on his shoes. The changes in him were subtle but real. He listened more carefully now. He no longer rushed to defend every mistake or explain away every problem. Instead, he asked questions about suppliers, staffing, and budgeting with genuine interest. Together, we slowly simplified parts of the downtown operation by cutting unnecessary luxury expenses and focusing again on quality rather than image. For the first time in years, Whitmore Bakery felt less like a performance and more like a family business again. Meanwhile, Vanessa's carefully crafted Charleston social reputation was quietly collapsing. Invitations to upscale events became less frequent. Investors started distancing themselves from the business publicly. Online criticism grew sharper each week, especially after rumors spread about financial instability behind the glamorous branding. Then one afternoon, my attorney called unexpectedly and asked me to come to his office privately. What he revealed left me sitting in stunned silence. Months earlier, Vanessa had consulted legal professionals about financial guardianship options involving me. According to documents my attorney obtained, she had explored ways to declare me mentally unfit in order to gain stronger control over company assets and voting power. A physician she knew socially had even been encouraged to document what Vanessa described as mild cognitive decline. For several seconds, I could barely breathe. The betrayal reached far beyond money or disrespect. Vanessa had quietly considered taking away my independence entirely. I left the office feeling older than I had in years. At first, I said nothing to Daniel. Part of me wanted to protect him from more pain. Another part simply felt exhausted by how dark the situation had become beneath the surface. But eventually I realized silence would only continue the cycle that nearly destroyed our family in the first place. 2 nights later, after we finished closing the bakery, I told him everything. I watched the color drain slowly from his face while he sat across from me at the kitchen table. Daniel admitted he knew Vanessa constantly wanted more control over the company finances, but he never imagined she would consider something so extreme. For the first time since childhood, I saw my son completely emotionally undone. The shame in his eyes was painful to witness. He kept apologizing for ignoring warning signs, for avoiding conflict, for allowing fear and passivity to slowly poison the family business his father helped build. Listening to him, I realized something important. Silence does not stay neutral forever. Eventually, silence becomes participation. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, overcome with regret and grief. Despite everything, my instincts as a mother remained stronger than my anger. I moved beside him quietly and rested my hand against his shoulder the same way I had comforted him when he was small. I told him forgiveness was possible, but trust would need time, honesty, and consistency to fully return. The following weekend, Daniel spent hours helping me restore the old wooden Whitmore Bakery sign that once hung above our original storefront decades ago. As we carefully polished the faded lettering together, I realized healing was finally beginning. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. And perhaps honest healing matters more than perfect appearances ever will. If you have stayed with this story all the way to this point, Comment number 8 below before we move into the final outcome of this family's journey. The ending reveals whether broken relationships can truly heal after betrayal this deep. 1 year after everything fell apart, Whitmore Bakery finally felt like home again. The tension and gossip that once surrounded our family had faded into the background of Charleston life. People eventually moved on to newer scandals and newer headlines, but inside the bakery, something quieter and far more meaningful had slowly taken shape. Peace. Not perfect peace, because some wounds never disappear completely, but honest peace. The downtown location no longer looked like a luxury showroom designed for social media photographs. The oversized floral walls and gold decorations were gone, replaced with the warm lighting, handwritten menu boards, and the familiar smell of fresh bread drifting through the building each morning. Customers returned because the bakery finally felt genuine again. Daniel changed too, not overnight, and not through dramatic speeches. His transformation happened through consistency. He arrived early every morning, treated employees with patience, and focused more on quality than appearances. The expensive suits disappeared, replaced by rolled sleeves dusted with flour during long shifts. For the first time in years, I saw my son becoming himself again, instead of performing for other people. Vanessa was no longer involved in the business. After months of tension and public financial fallout, she quietly disappeared from Charleston social circles. Her online influence had faded almost as quickly as it had grown. Daniel rarely spoke about the separation, and I never pushed him to. Despite everything that happened, I felt sadness more than victory. Families breaking apart never feel like winning. That autumn, the Charleston Small Business Association organized a celebration honoring the 40th anniversary of Whitmore Bakery. I expected a small local event with coffee and polite speeches. Instead, the bakery overflowed with longtime customers, former employees, neighbors, and community members carrying stories I had almost forgotten myself. Historic photographs covered the walls, pictures of Thomas smiling beside the original ovens, pictures of me carrying trays twice my size while Daniel played near the kitchen doorway. For the first time in many years, our real history stood proudly in public instead of hidden behind polished branding campaigns. During the ceremony, Daniel personally guided me toward the center of the room when the association director began speaking about the bakery's history. I tried stepping back out of habit, but Daniel gently shook his head. This time, he wanted people to see me. As applause filled the room, I looked around at faces that had supported our bakery for decades. Many of them remembered the hardest years. They remembered Thomas. They remembered the sacrifices behind every loaf of bread and every pie cooling near the windows. Standing there, I realized how long I had spent hiding behind service and responsibility without allowing myself to be recognized. Not because I wanted praise, but because I never believed my story mattered enough. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, Daniel and I quietly cleaned the bakery together while soft jazz played through the empty dining room. Outside, Charleston streets glowed beneath warm autumn lights. As we locked the front doors side by side, I finally understood something important. Some broken things never return to what they once were, but sometimes, with honesty and effort, they become something real again. A few weeks after the anniversary celebration, I stayed late at the bakery one quiet evening after everyone else had gone home. The dining room glowed softly beneath the warm hanging lights, while the scent of cinnamon bread still lingered faintly in the air. Outside, Charleston moved slowly through another peaceful night, headlights reflecting against damp sidewalks after a brief rain. I carried the old storage box from my office and placed it carefully on one of the back tables. For a long time, I simply sat there looking at it. inside were the pieces of a life that once felt broken beyond repair. Daniel's childhood photographs rested beside Thomas's handwritten recipes and yellowed newspaper clippings from the early years of Whitmore Bakery. Beneath them all remained the folded white paper with the 6 words that changed everything. "You erased me. Now watch closely." When I first wrote those words, I believed they came from heartbreak alone. But sitting there now, I understood they came from something deeper. Awakening. For too many years, I confused love with endless sacrifice. I believed keeping peace inside the family meant staying silent whenever my own feelings became inconvenient. Little by little, I allowed myself to become invisible inside the very life I helped build. I do not regret loving my son deeply. I only regret how long I ignored my own dignity. Daniel still has much growing left to do, but now I finally see honesty returning to him. Not perfection, not easy redemption, just honest effort, one day at a time. In many ways, that matters more. As for Vanessa, I no longer carry bitterness toward her. Ambition without values eventually destroys everything it touches, including the people chasing it. Carefully, I returned the photographs and recipes to the box before closing the lid gently. The pain never disappeared completely. It simply changed into wisdom. Before leaving, I turned off the bakery lights one by one and stood quietly near the front door, looking back at the empty dining room Thomas and I once dreamed about building together. Then I stepped into the cool Charleston night, finally understanding something I wish I had learned years earlier. Respect is not something you beg your family to give you. Sometimes, it begins the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve. Sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from strangers, but from the people who once promised to stand beside us forever. Life has a way of teaching that love without respect slowly turns into quiet pain, and silence maintained for too long can make even the strongest hearts feel invisible. But there also comes a moment when choosing dignity is no longer selfish. It becomes necessary. Real family is not built on money, appearances, or convenience. It is built on loyalty, honesty, gratitude, and the courage to value one another before it is too late. And sometimes, the hardest lessons lead to the most meaningful healing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched your heart in any way, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts or personal experiences. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more emotional stories about family, respect, and second chances.